This near-death experience story is one of the most touching ones I've heard yet. I had the opportunity to speak to David Bennett, who was a chief engineer of a sea research vessel in his 20s. He had a difficult life and especially a difficult family life, so this accomplishment was huge for him. When he drowned in an accident at work, though, he realized that he maybe had a different family, a soul family, and that what he thought was important on Earth wasn't actually as meaningful as some other things. This is David's story.
And I drowned. I immediately, there was just a second of burning salt water going into my lungs. And then I was out of my body and in this absolute darkness. But only it was absolutely quiet. It wasn't, 25, 30-foot seas is incredibly loud. It's like roaring, Suddenly it's quiet. It's peaceful. I don't feel like I'm being tumbled and tossed. And this was in March. It's extremely cold water. I'm not cold anymore. I'm comfortable. I just feel like I'm just suspended in this blackness. But also, I didn't really feel alone. I felt like there was a presence. It's very hard to describe, but it felt like, that everything is involved in this blackness, this darkness. And so, like many people that go in, a lot of times they call this the void. Many people that experience the void, a lot of times it's frightening. It can be a scary place if suddenly you're in this absolute darkness, totally suspended, right? But for me, I just came from this violence, this incredible violence where I was being tumbled and tossed like crazy, and to find myself in this absolute calm and quiet. And as a commercial diver, we're trained to recognize oxygen deprivation and the danger signs and all that. And this has gone way beyond that, my training. And so I was curious. I was incredibly curious as to, where am I? What's going on? And then I saw this speck of light. And it was the only thing to look at in this darkness. And so you're just kind of drawn to it. And as I paid attention and put awareness on this light, I felt like suddenly there was movement toward the light. And to this day, I don't know if I was moving toward it, it was moving toward me, but there was movement toward this light. And as I got closer and closer, I started feeling these waves of love. I felt almost like a warm embrace. I was just mystified by this. And so I kept getting closer and closer. And the closer I got, I started to recognize that the light itself wasn't just a beam of light. It was millions upon millions of fragments of light. And they were all in movement. And they were, if you've ever seen like a school of fish, when they're all balled up together and suddenly they'll take a change of direction and they all shift at the same time. And you can see all the different multitudes of colors in their scales and that sort of thing. Well, all these fragments of light were multiple, colors. They all had that same kind of movement. And I was just in awe. I was just in awe of what I was experiencing. And I kept getting closer and closer and closer. And I was feeling more loved and loved. And and so eventually 3 fragments broke away and they started coming toward me. And as they did, I understood. It was a clear sense of communication, but I understood that they were welcoming me home. And I was just overwhelmed with this love and this welcoming that I was receiving. And eventually a dozen of these light fragments came and they were all greeting me. And I realized that at this point that I had become a fragment of light. And they communicated with me that we were going to go deeper into the light. And as we did, we went into this area. To me, it felt very spherical, a big giant ball, and we went inside. And once we got inside, it was like I started reliving my life. And it wasn't like watching a movie screen or anything as simple as that. It was much more involved because it felt like I was reliving it, but not only from my point of view, but from everyone I'd ever interacted with from their point of view. And so that was mind-blowing, to say the least. And so again, I was in absolute awe. But then I started to realize what I was watching, and that I also realized that this group of beings that greeted me, that came into this area, the sphere with me, were experiencing it the same way I was. So they were reliving my life through my life review. I mean, that's what it really is, a life review. And so I was like, I was a little, because I was a brash young man. I mean, I was really a brash young man. I really didn't care about other people's points of view. I was very self-involved, and so we started experiencing, because this is more experiencing, because it's not just my point of view, but it's like my consciousness fragmented into these multiple streams, and I'm experiencing it from whoever I've interacted with, their point of view. It was just multi-dimensional viewing this life. And I did, I was very self-involved. So I stepped over people. I ran over people. I really didn't care. But my soul family was experiencing this the same way I was, because that's what I call them now, is my soul family. And I was a little bit ashamed of some of the things that I was doing, but they weren't. They were just loving me, supporting me, and just observing. There was no judgment whatsoever. It was just observation of what was going on. The judgment that was happening within me more than anything. And I got to see things in a way that just, again, in awe. I was in absolute awe, where I would see things that I did with just pure loving intention, without any thought of something for myself. Those would create these incredible ripples. When I did something that, like, I had a huge ego, all right? And something that really fed my ego, like becoming the chief engineer of a research vessel in my mid-20s, that was incredible for me, meant very little in the near-death experience. It caused the least amount of ripples, okay? But when I did something with loving intention for someone, it created these immense ripples of after effects, So I was, so I got to see this, and I got to, kind of try to figure out, the meaning of all of this that's going on all around me, the multiple streams of input that I was receiving. And then we got to a point where I started seeing things that I didn't have reference for in my lifetime. And I didn't realize at the time, but I was seeing my future potential. And it disoriented me a little bit, but my I call them my soul family. They supported me. They loved me. They buoyed me up so that we could experience this potential that was available to me. And it was like looking down a corridor where everything in front of you was crystal clear, just like the life review was everything, and everything that I re-experienced in my life was absolutely clear. Once we got into future potential life, it was just the very central path seemed clear. But on the periphery, you could see there was other aspects that and it felt like, if I wanted to, I could go this way or I could go that way, but it felt like I was always drawn to this crystal clear central path. And so as we proceeded down, I got to see and experience, because it's more than seeing, it was experiencing this potential future. But I finally reached this one point where the light itself, okay, these millions upon millions of fragments of light spoke in unison, and I perceived this to be God, spoke to me, and it said, "This is not your time. You must return." And I said, "No way." So I was arguing with what I perceived as God. I said, "No, I've got a family that loves me like I've never been loved before, because my family on earth was, pretty dysfunctional. And so I'm feeling loved like I've never felt before. I don't want to go back to that body. That body is just broken for me. And so the light again, it spoke one more time. It said, you must return. You have a purpose. And it was with this parental voice that was just so loving. And the word purpose just resonated. I mean, it just resonated through my being. And with that, and because we're in this light, okay, where we have this ability to, it's like we're connected to all the souls that ever were and all the souls that ever will be. So you have this expansive consciousness that's available to you. And that word purpose just resonated through my body, and I understood it. And it was simple, it was efficient, and the only option was to just come to acceptance that, yes, this is what really needs to happen. And with that, I found myself outside my body, and it's still in the breaker zone. There's an area in the wave cycles that you can get caught up and just keep spinning and spinning. And so my body is caught up in this like vortex underwater deep. And but I'm standing outside my body, and the 3 original light beings that greeted me were with me, and we're watching my body. And some of the wreckage from the zodiac, and specifically the bow line, had come in close proximity to my body, and it started to wrap itself around my arm, and all of a sudden another set of waves hit, and when they did, there was some air left in one of the pontoons of the zodiac. The zodiac popped up, and when it did, it cinched that line around my arm, and it pulled my body up. And when it did, I got tangled up in the wreckage of this zodiac and what was left of it, And I'm watching this. I'm not in my body. I'm just observing this. And because I had this sense of calm and a bit of, I have to say, almost like mystery of how is the enormity of my light being going to fit in that body. And that's what I was pondering while all of this was going on. And another set of waves came, and they started pounding my body up against the wreckage. And when it did, it pushed some of that salt water out of my lungs. And at that moment, that's when my soul family gave me a gentle push, and I felt this vibration as I came back into my body and came back into physical awareness, but I still felt like I was half here and half there. So I had a little bit of that expansive awareness, but it was like evaporating, It messed with my mind for a long time, because to be in the right place, to be pushed up against that, wreckage, in order for it to push some of that salt water out so that I could be resuscitated by the ocean and by being pounded up against this wreckage. That's not common. That really messed with my mind for a long time, because I was like, okay, then that means there's and I knew there was a purpose, because I saw that. So this miraculous resuscitation had purpose behind it. One of the things that I saw in my near-death experience, when I was looking down that corridor of my future life, was that I was going to have cancer. Well, in my 40s, so a few years went by, and I'd had that second experience, and then I'd also had a number of small experiences that helped me to really integrate these spiritual experiences. But I always knew that I was going to have cancer at some point, because I saw it in the life review. But I thought it was going to happen, like in my doties, maybe 80s, 90s, something like that, But all of a sudden in my 40s, I'm sitting at my desk. I quit my life at sea. I started working as a manager in dialysis at a hospital. And I'm sitting at my office, and suddenly my back felt like it exploded. I mean, I was just viewing everything through this red haze of pain. I mean, fortunately, here I am working as a manager in a hospital. So I told my director, I went into her office because I was supposed to have a meeting with her. I said, I'm going to go to the ED. I'm in a lot of pain. And so I went to the emergency department. I presented myself. They did x-rays. They did a whole bunch of stuff. They did a bunch of tests, and I'm in a emergency room, and the nurse comes in. Now, this nurse I personally knew, because she was one of my secretaries while she's going to nursing school. And so she comes in, and there's tears in her eyes, and she's like, "Oh, Dave, the doctor's going to be in here in a minute." And I recognize that moment from my life review. I had seen that in the life review. And so I had enough of spiritual experiences that by this point I was like, wow, I know what's going to happen. I know when he comes through the door, he's going to come in, he's going to kind of be hemming and hawing and just, kind of, how do I present that this guy, has terminal cancer? And so he's kind of like reluctant when he comes in, and sure enough, he comes in and she's teary-eyed, and I'm, telling her, "Oh, don't worry, everything's going to be okay." And so when the doctor finally tells me, he's like, "We'll make you as comfortable as possible because this is really severe." And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I saw I was going to have cancer, but I also saw I was going to live beyond it. But I wasn't prepared for a really bad case of cancer, And so there was a moment where it was like, wow, this could be my ticket home. I could go to the other side. But also there was the other side where I had seen I was going to have cancer, but I also saw I was going to live beyond it, and that there was a great purpose in the living beyond it. So I was like, so they wanted to do a whole bunch more tests, which they did. They were just going to give me morphine and Percocet and told me to get my affairs in order. That was in the emergency room, but in the workup while they were working up, the bone studies and all this stuff. But anyway, because they found I had lesions not only in my lungs, but it had metastasized into my spine, ate away 2.5 bones of my thoracic, and my spine had collapsed because the tumor could no longer support the weight of my spine. And they found lesions in my hip, my brain, and my kidneys. So it was stage 4. It was rapidly expanding, and they didn't feel there was much use in treating it. But I disagreed, because if I can say no to God, I can say no to these doctors. That's no sweat. And so I picked my care team, and we started treating it. But I also balanced it out with some holistic approaches, because I had a very strong spiritual guidance. And so I didn't like the morphine and Percocet, because when I was really dosed heavy, especially with the morphine, I couldn't hear spirit. I couldn't hear, my spirit communication got cloudy, and I couldn't hear it. And so that disturbed me more than the actual cancer. So I had some amazing experiences. One I would call an angelic experience, where I saw how to get off of the morphine and use more of mindfulness to control the pain, so that I would have the clarity to be able to communicate, have my spirit communication. That was critical in my life, and so I needed that in order to determine how I was going to overcome the cancer. I was very fortunate that within 6 months, I was on chemo and radiation at the same time. And within 6 months, my spirit guidance was telling me that things had improved. And I asked if they would do another PET scan, because that shows all the active cancer cells, and they, begrudgingly, it took a little bit of convincing, because in their reality, I was on the road to the grave. And they didn't even want to treat me, but it was because I have patient rights. I was able to get the treatment that I wanted, and so they thought that these were extra unnecessary measures, and that the testing would just be something else. And so they were trying to keep me, they were trying to keep me comfortable. They were trying to reduce stress and stuff. So they felt another test that just showed that I was dying of cancer wouldn't be good for me. So they kind of put it off. But then I insisted, and I got my test, but then nobody read the results for like almost, nobody wanted to read the results because they didn't want to give me the bad news. They were in their minds, they were being compassionate. But but anyway, they eventually, I was able to convince, there was a nurse in the oncology unit where I was getting treated, that his brother worked for me in dialysis. And so I knew him. And so I said, hey, I couldn't look at my own chart, but I said, would you look at the results of that exam, that PET scan, and let me know. He says, well, I can't let you know, but I can let your doctor know. And so he told my doctor, and then the doctor came in, and he goes, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. We've got some great results. We're going to do some more tests. And I said, well, I'll do some more tests, but we're going to stop treatment because I know the cancer's gone.
Thank you so much to David Bennett for sharing his story. My name is Lauren, and I do the interviews on T&H Afterlife. If you want to see more videos like this centered around positivity and dispelling fears around death, make sure to subscribe. Thank you, everyone.